The following programming is made possible through a generous donation from Randall Lewis, Executive Vice President of Upland-based Lewis Operating Companies.
Welcome to another Randall Lewis seminar. We thank you very much for watching. This is a look at a seminar that took place last night. Title was The Updated Future of the Inland Empire. The language of updated comes from a publication by the Public Policy Institute of California in 2008. It said the Inland Empire in 2015. And so the purpose of this seminar we had last night, or the seminar last night, and the discussion today is to look at what was said about the Inland Empire in 2008, look at it where we're now, and then take that to see where we're going in our future. Two members from PPIC participated last night. One, Han Johnson, whose official title is Center Director and Senior Fellow. The second was Joseph Hayes, a Research Associate. Before I start asking who you are, maybe let's just talk briefly about PPIC, because the language of this says informing and improving public policy through independent, objective, nonpartisan research. My own view, you're the best in the state, is a wonderful resource that's available online that anybody has access to. If you haven't gone online and looked at PPIC, you should see the range of research that's done. But tell us a little bit about PPIC.
Yeah, so PPIC was founded a little over 20 years ago, and our focus is on studying issues that affect California and Californians. So we look at a number of different areas, including education, governance issues, criminal justice, health and welfare. And part of our work is to look at what the big challenges are facing California going forward. We are independent. We use data as much as we can, as much as it's available. And one of the reasons we've done work looking at different regions in California is because we know that the state as a whole is important, of course. But to understand the state, you have to understand its regions. And the Inland Empire, or Inland Southern California, whatever terminology is preferred, is clearly one of the most important regions in the state, and it's often overlooked. And it's one reason why we did that initial report back in 2007, 2008, and why we're happy to be here today to give you some reflections on what we did right, what we did wrong, and what we think that means for going forward.
Why don't you give just the briefest profile of who you are?
So yeah, I am Center Director of the new Higher Education Center at the Public Policy Institute of California. I'm a Senior Fellow. I have a PhD in demography from Berkeley, and have been working at PPIC for over 15 years.
Yeah.
I used to work much more closely with Hans than I do now, unfortunately, but we did a lot of population work, a lot of regional work, including some studies of the Central Valley and this one on the Inland Empire. Now I split my time mainly between K through 12 education and corrections.
How does a PhD from Madison end up in California?
Well, I'm from California to begin with. I got my master's in Wisconsin and hurried back to study California.
Well, I looked at what was the sort of highlights of the study of 2007, 2008, and this is the headlines of that study. By 2015, almost 5 million people live in the Inland Empire. Latinos will become the new majority. Migration accounts for most of the growth. Educational attainment levels will increase only slightly. Employment is shifting toward higher educated workers. Many in the Inland Empire will continue to commute to other regions for work, and the region's voters will not reflect the ethnic diversity of the population. There was also what they call at the time the research brief, and it had one important sentence I like to share because I think it focuses attention on on the economy of this region. It said in 2006, of 51 metropolitan areas in the United States that had more than 500,000 jobs, the Inland Empire ranked second to last with an annual average of $36,924. At the bottom was Oklahoma City. Above us was Buffalo. So you looked at population, you looked at economy, you looked at education. That's what you found in 2008. What do you find in 2015?
So maybe we could take those one at a time and start with population, and then I'll hand off to Joe for some of the population and then the economy discussion, and then maybe back to me at some point on education. So the big picture in California in terms of population change is that the urban coastal areas have been filling up, and as they become more densely populated, and in some cases as they implement growth controls, new growth in California has moved inland. And so over the last 40 years or so, and we have a slide up now that shows that the inland areas of the state have been capturing a larger and larger share of the state's population. So it's not just happening down here in Southern California, it's also happening up north in Northern California. But among those inland regions, it is really the Inland Empire or inland Southern California that has seen the most growth. And when we did our study, as you noted just now, I'm actually pleased. Many of those recommendations or many of those projections are accurate and did come to bear. The big one we missed was, of course, population growth. And so what's happened is, in fact, here I'm showing a slide that shows total population in the region. And what's happened is growth has slowed tremendously. And of course, we did those projections right before the Great Recession,
Yeah.
which was the biggest recession we've had in our country since the Great Depression. And of course, that led to a very, very strong slowdown in growth. The housing crisis and foreclosure crisis led us into the depression or into the recession. And the locus of the foreclosure crisis, as you know, was here in the inland region. And so in the chart we have before you now, you see that over the last 5 years, the region has grown by about 200,000 people. You're up to about 4.4 million, substantially less than what we had projected. But that's still a big gain. It's just nowhere near the kinds of gains that you used to experience.
I remember driving across the Bay Bridge and listening to a radio announcement that California had passed New York. It was now 10 million people. Edmund Brown was celebrating the fact that we were now #1 largest state. That was 10 million back probably somewhere in the 50s. These are numbers here. What is, if you look out 20, 30 years, 40 years, what are people saying about the future growth of the state?
So California has gone through this period where we used to attract people from the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And so when we passed New York many decades ago, that was what was happening. And now for the last almost quarter century, we're a state that still receives people internationally, but we send people out to the rest of the country, and mostly to the rest of the West. So states like Arizona, Nevada, Oregon have experienced sharp population increases, partly because of people leaving California and moving there. We still gain people through migration. It's just mostly international now. And that's been a big sea change for us as a state, and that's kind of the new normal for California. The inland region, until very recently, was kind of the old California, pulling people in from other places, and not sending out too many people. But through the recession, and now even continuing after the recession, the inland region gains a lot of people from the South Coast still, not as many as it used to. But now it's sending people out to other places in California, mostly other states like Arizona and Nevada.
Other important points on population?
Diversity is a big phenomena here in the inland region. Joe's done some work looking at that.
Right. You mentioned that our projections included that Latinos would become a majority in the region, and that's very close to happening now. We have currently latest estimates the Department of Finance show Latinos at 49% of the state's population.
And growing.
And growing, right. That's up from about 44% in 2006. So if it hasn't happened already, it's likely to happen very soon that California will, that the Inland Empire will be a majority minority region.
Well, we're already a majority minority. I mean, a Hispanic. Yeah.
Right. Just strictly speaking, but as far as Latinos constituting a majority, right, as you mentioned, the projections, that's very close to occurring now. I want to be clear that we do still see strong growth throughout many of the subregions in the Inland Empire. It's not to the degree that we were witnessing when we wrote the report, but it continues to be a quickly growing region.
Well, we use this abstraction of the Inland Empire, inland Southern California, and the two counties. But you in this report and last night, you focus a lot also. You break these two counties into regions, and tell one, why do you do that, and what do you find as you begin to examine regions as opposed to the two counties as a whole?
When we set out to do this research, it became clear to us very quickly when we talked to experts in the region that as you pointed out, the Inland Empire as an abstraction it's not a monolithic entity, and that if you look at commute sheds, if you look at demographic differences, if you look at economic realities, that one place is very different from another. The high desert is very different from Coachella Valley, for instance. Southwestern Riverside, very different from eastern San Bernardino County. And so we talked to a lot of local experts to try to get a feel for how to constitute these regions so that they would each form a cohesive whole, and that we could talk about trends, both demographic and economic, and then educational trends within those subregions. So the slide that we have here illustrates how we've broken up the Inland Empire into those subregions. And in the report that you reference, we talk about population growth and economic changes within those subregions to highlight differences between them.
Yeah, it seems to me that's really a very important part of trying to understand our region, right?
Absolutely, and in looking at current estimates of population to see how we did in our projections, we find that there still are stark differences. Western Riverside, Western San Bernardino have continued to grow at large absolute in large absolute numbers. Also, the high desert in Coachella Valley. Other places like eastern San Bernardino have really slowed down. That's an area that's much more built out. It's a more long-standing region, and there's not the scope for either new building or annexing adjacent areas to support that kind of growth.
Talk a little more about diversity, because I think we need to understand what is taking place. You mentioned, I was looking at one of your charts, and the city of Riverside now's latest kind of SCAG figures were 52% Hispanic, we're about 32% white, we have a 6-8%, we have a slightly more Asian than African American, but it's very similar to what you find, at least the county data for Riverside County.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, what we find as far as demography is concerned, that just take Latinos for an example, we find that Latinos are overrepresented among the youngest age groups and underrepresented among the oldest. So if we're talking about the working population, we're talking about the population that's being educated currently. That's much more heavily Latino population than you find in the overall population.
The old guys are more white. The younger are more Latino.
Yeah, although that's changing as well. As the Latino population it ages along with the rest of the region's population, the rest of the state's population. Also, we find that the Latino population is now more long-standing, as Hans pointed out earlier. It's not so much that we have recent immigrants from abroad, but we have A lot of the Latino population are people who have moved from the South Coast.
They're second generation.
In many cases, yeah. So those are people who are not necessarily the new arrivals that you think of, who are in their prime working age. They're typically people who've been here either a full generation before, or they've come from the South Coast or other regions.
The African American population, how is it distributed in the inland region?
The African American population region-wide has stayed fairly steady at about 7% of the entire region, but that varies quite a bit from sub-region to sub-region. And I believe that eastern San Bernardino is the highest concentration of African Americans in the sub-regions that we identify.
And at one point recently, San Bernardino County had the highest share of its population made up of African Americans of any county in the state, which is a pretty remarkable change. And what's been happening here and up north is that traditional centers for African American neighborhoods have seen population losses among African Americans. In Northern California, it's people moving out of places like Oakland, San Francisco, and Berkeley to some of the inland suburbs, and same thing here from south central Los Angeles, for example, to San Bernardino.
In Los Angeles County, there are a number of major Asian, kind of at least in areas, major Asian population. Is that true here in the inland region?
We also do see some variation. Overall, again, the Asian Pacific Islander community is about 6% of the Inland Empire's population, but that varies quite a bit. By sub-region. I'm off the top of my head, I believe that the western San Bernardino region has high concentrations of Asian population.
Yeah. Housing always likes to use the number of how we are compared to other states. And I guess we're now, we just passed Kentucky. We're the 24th, if we were a state, would be the 24th largest state in the country. Is that approximately correct?
Yes, I think I totally trust John Husing's number there. Yeah, we've looked at metropolitan areas in population ranks. This region is, in fact, we have a slide on this too. The region is the 13th most populated metropolitan area in the country.
In the country, 13th most populated metropolitan. Wow.
And it has 1.2 million more people than the San Diego metropolitan region. As many people don't realize, I think many people in California and certainly in the rest of the country, many people don't even know that the Inland Empire exists, or they don't know much about Riverside or San Bernardino if they know anything at all. And yet it has more people than Minneapolis, a metropolitan area. It has substantially more people than, as I said, San Diego metropolitan area.
Any other major points on population that need to be understood?
Well, one thing I'd like to note, since we put so much time into this, was we developed these net migration flow data.
Tell us about that, because one of your important points is migration accounts for most of the growth. When you mention migration, almost immediate thought it's outside the country.
Right, and so really most of the migration, I have a slide up now that shows this, almost all of the migration to the region has come from the coastal counties of Los Angeles, Orange, and San Diego. And I'm toggling back and forth. I hope that works on screen for people. But the first period is from 2000 to 2007, which was this period of very strong growth. And then the most recent period, after our projections, and you see that the size of the flows declined dramatically from every South Coast county to both San Bernardino and Riverside counties. And we most recently just looked at flows with the rest of the US, and you see especially San Bernardino, but even Riverside are losing substantial numbers of people to the rest of the US. So at the end of the day, what's really driving growth now, and there's only 3 ways you can grow. It's through births, deaths, or migration. What's really driving most of the growth right now is what we call natural increase, more births than deaths. Migration plays a relatively small role.
Well, I know it's the issue of people who are leaving the 2 counties, leaving this region, is a considerable number?
It is. Now realize, you're getting a lot of people still from the South Coast. So on a net basis, you're still gaining migrants. Yeah. But what's happening is you also are losing in exchanges, for example, with Nevada, which is mostly Las Vegas, with Arizona, which is mostly Phoenix, maybe secondarily Tucson. And the reason people are making those moves are similar but a little different than the reason people were moving to this region. So surveys show that most people who have moved to this region cite housing as one of the main reasons. And by housing, they mean more affordable housing or higher quality or larger housing, people who want to own rather than rent, or also people who want to rent but at lower rental prices than they would pay in the coast. And many of those people, of course, are commuting back to jobs in the coast. When someone moves to Las Vegas or Phoenix from the Inland Empire, they're not commuting back to a job here. So but one reason they are still moving too is, yes, it's jobs related, but also it's housing related. And so that even though we here think of the inland region as being relatively affordable in terms of housing, that's because we're comparing it with some of the most expensive real estate in the country, Los Angeles County, Orange County, and San Diego County. If we compare prices here with Phoenix or Tucson or Las Vegas, this region looks somewhat expensive. And so people who are also thinking about cost of living, the same thing that drove some people here also drives some people out.
You mentioned Nebraska cost.
Median prices in places like Nebraska are in the $100,000 range. There's large, but it's not. I'm not trying to pick on Nebraska. But there are some large metropolitan areas. In fact, one of the metropolitan areas that you identified on our list of places that had lower wages, Oklahoma City and Buffalo, both sizable metropolitan areas. Median housing prices there are less than $200,000 per house, and there's neighborhoods where you can't give a house away there.
Can we move to economics? Last night you presented a couple of very interesting, I thought, charts on the economy of this region. And, if you could talk a little bit about that.
When we first did this study, one of the things that struck us about the Inland Empire is that it continued to have high job growth. And I've put my slide up now that indicates that was certainly the case just prior to our study. And as an anomaly, during the recession and since the recession, during part of the recovery, the job growth, non-farm employment in the Inland Empire has been lower than the state average, and that's the first time that's happened in a long time. Since about 2012, that the Inland Empire has recovered, and job growth continues to be above the state rate. So jobs are returning to the Inland Empire. The question that is begged by that comparison is, what kind of jobs are these?
That was last night. Somebody asked you, what about temp jobs? Those are included in the job category.
They are. So when you just look at the chart that we have now, it's the number of jobs, and the picture looks relatively rosy, but that's an excellent question. That's not all of those are full-time jobs. There's the question of remuneration as well. How well-paying are these jobs? Unfortunately, the poverty rates continue to be quite high in the Inland Empire, notwithstanding the job growth that we've seen. And among the metros that we identified earlier, the Inland Empire stands out as being the highest poverty rate at 18.2%, notwithstanding the continued job growth that we've seen.
And I think last night you added that it's some different. The poverty rate from living in San Francisco is different from poverty rate living here in the inland region.
Well, depending on what poverty measure you use, and the federal poverty level is a single number for no matter where you live. Some of our colleagues at PPIC, Sarah Bone and Caroline Danielson, have been working on a California poverty measure that takes into account cost of living and some other regional specificities. So in their work, they take into account the sort of things that you're considering. How much, what does $300,000 get you if you're on the housing market? What is $30,000 a year? What sort of standard of living does that provide?
I could go on the PPIC site and find some information on that.
Definitely. Yeah. If you look for a California poverty measure, they've done a number of publications using that metric.
www.ppic.org.
One other chart that I remember last night that was particularly important to me was sort of ranking of the regions of the state in terms of, I guess, household income. We knew we didn't compete with the coastal counties, but I think it was startling, and this was the relationship to the San Joaquin Valley. And if you would comment on that.
Sure. So the slide we have up now indexes per capita income at a measure of 100, starting in 1969. And what the chart shows is the increasing disparity between regions in per capita income. So if you look at a period of 1974, for instance, all of the regions were within about 10% of the California mean. Since then, the disparity has increased to the point where San Joaquin Valley and the Inland Empire are at about 70% of the California mean, whereas regions like Bay Area and Orange County are far above that.
This is really an important chart, right? I mean,
Absolutely. During last night's presentation, a lot of people expressed surprise that the Inland Empire has now fallen below the San Joaquin Valley, and these are regional averages, so it's there's a lot of variation within them. But for a long time, the San Joaquin Valley was identified as having the lowest per capita income regionally, and the Inland Empire is now on about par with that, and in the latest estimates has even fallen below the San Joaquin Valley for per capita income.
Yeah, which seems to me it's very instructive information that in addition to having jobs, you also want jobs that can pay a decent living.
That's right, and so when we set out to do this report, we're looking at what were likely to be the industries that were growing the fastest.
Yeah, what's happening? That was another very interesting part of your presentation, I thought.
Well, we identified that administrative services, wholesale trade, transportation and warehousing, construction, and then professional, scientific, and technical services would be the fastest growing. And looking back at what's actually happened, I think all but construction have in fact continued to grow. The important thing about that, and to get to the point that we were discussing earlier about the quality of these jobs, is that only one of those, the professional, scientific, and technical services, is really an industry that can be considered highly remunerative or that requires workers with a high degree of post-secondary training. So those other industries that in fact have continued to grow and bring in jobs to the Inland Empire are still industries that don't require a lot of training, at least formal training, and don't pay very well. So that contributes to a lot of the income results that we've been talking about today.
You had one chart that compared to minus the state, above the state in terms of number and below the state in terms of number. What was that about?
Right, so in this chart we itemize the industries that have disproportionately high employment in the Inland Empire. And what we're showing here is the location quotient, the percentage of jobs in the economy that are in that industry regionally divided by the state percentage of jobs in that industry. So if the location quotient is above 1, then there are more jobs in the Inland Empire, disproportionately more jobs in the Inland Empire in that industry than you'd find in the statewide. So on this table here, we've circled some of the industries that have disproportionate employment in the Inland Empire, and by and large, those are not highly remunerative industries to work in. By contrast, we've, in the next slide, looked at industries with disproportionately low employment, and then many of those are the sort of things that we would like to see increase here. They're jobs that require a college degree in many cases, jobs that pay very well, and so far, the Inland Empire does not have a high proportion of employment.
Why don't you call those out? I thought those were, what are those?
Chief among them is the professional, scientific, and technical services that we had identified as a candidate to provide a lot of job growth.
So the finance and insurance, very low representation here. Information, which is really computer science and computer programming type jobs, very low. And then, as Joe already mentioned, professional technical services are quite low.
Well, if I want to get a copy of this this PowerPoint, I guess we can. It'll be on our. I guess this interview will be on our website. How else can I get a PowerPoint?
So we'd be happy to have you put a link or put the PowerPoint on your website too.
We'll do that because I mean I think that this is the best information that's available in the state, and we ought to know what it is, and so that's good. Anything else on the economy?
I would say that the next step is to talk about education. I mean, we've sort of led into that with the needs for a more highly educated population to take the jobs that we hope to see coming to the Inland Empire.
Well, last night I thought you were informed, you were passionate, and you were persuasive about education and education attainment. There were more than numbers. There really are a kind of, I don't know if you overstate the word, but kind of a golden key for a region.
It is, and it's not just for this region. It's for actually the entire world, and I don't want to overstate it, but I don't think you can very much. We've done, and the reason we established a higher education center within PPIC is because of the importance of education for our future. And what we are seeing is what people are seeing throughout the developed world, and that is employers are increasingly looking for more highly skilled and highly educated workers. In many cases, and we heard this last night too, after the talk from people in the room who know employers who cannot find workers that have the skills they need, and yet there are a large number of people out there looking for jobs, and there's this mismatch between the skills people have and what employers are looking for. We've done work statewide that suggests that unless we have pretty substantial increases in college going and college completion in California, we will have a less technically skilled economy, which means lower wages, and it means less tax revenue. It means more demand for social services. So the challenge for the state, and this is true again for the United States as a whole, is to find ways to improve college going and college completion. The wage premium for going to college is at an all-time high. And so part of that disparity that you saw, what Joe was talking about, is the regional disparity, is to a large extent driven by differences in educational attainment in those regions, with places like the Bay Area becoming very, very highly educated, one of the most highly educated regions in the country, along with Washington, D.C., which is kind of funny, and then the inland region really not keeping pace. And in our earlier projections, one of the projections we were correct about was there would be some improvements here, but not very dramatic improvements, and we're showing a slide now that shows that the inland region still lags behind the rest of the state quite a bit with respect to educational attainment.
Cities used to talk about the talent dividend, the percent of people that had a BA or higher. How does our region compare with other regions and the state?
So the region's quite low compared to the other regions in the state, and I have a chart up now that shows the percent that have at least a bachelor's degree or more. Statewide, it's about a third. In the region here, it's more like 20%. So there's a lot of room for improvement. There are some encouraging signs. So one of the things that we've been looking at quite a bit is that pipeline to college, and then also looking at it once you get to college, what happens. And the positive news is that increasingly students are completing high school. Dropout rates are going down in California and in the inland region here. And the share of those graduates who have taken the college preparatory courses in high school that are required for UC and CSU admission has been going up quite a bit. The region still lags the rest of the state in terms of the share of high school students who have taken those college preparatory courses. But as I said, there's strong improvement. Riverside County is actually almost at the state average right now. San Bernardino County is still quite a ways below the state average. And one of the groups where we've seen the most improvement in terms of being prepared for college are among Latinos in California and here in this region. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that the levels are still lower than we would like, and that a large number of students start college but don't finish, and that's especially true at the community colleges, which are by far and away the largest provider of higher education in this region.
Yes, speak to that. I mean, I think, as I remember a chart, you had 100, when we have 16 colleges and universities in the inland region, but you said there's about 100,000 students taking coursework at community colleges. That's a big number.
Yeah, so the community college enrollment is huge. I have a slide up now that shows it's around 100,000 students. It's been fairly flat at that enrollment level for a while. The problem we have as a state, and here in this region too, isn't necessarily getting students into community colleges. There are issues there, but they're relatively affordable. A large number of students who attend those institutions receive fee waivers, so they don't have to pay any tuition or fees to attend. The big challenge is getting them out, and it's getting them to either, for those who are interested in transferring to a four-year college or university, getting them through the coursework, and then having room in many cases at the CSUs and the UCs for those students, because there's been problems with availability in terms of capacity at those institutions to accommodate all the transfer students. And then for those who are on a vocational path, the challenge is to find vocational certificates that are meaningful to employers, that lead to good jobs. And clearly there are some, and some of our colleagues are looking at, for example, some of the health certificates, and of course the shining example is the registered nurse associate's degree that leads to very, very good wage outcomes for people who go through that program.
If you were a chancellor of the community college system, what kind of things that, I mean, I think it is discouraging to see how the number start and so few actually complete either a certificate or a training program or a transfer. What, if you were to have recommendations for this region, what would they be?
So there's some positive news in terms of what's happening there. A few years ago, there was a community college student success task force that identified some of the obstacles to student completion and success, and resulted in some legislation that changed how students were incentivized, or how institutions were incentivized to help improve student outcomes. So, for example, we have a new associate's degree for transfer, it's called. So it used to be that you could earn an associate's degree, which is in California considered an academic degree at a community college, but it wouldn't allow you to transfer to a UC or CSU because it wouldn't meet any of their requirements, or wouldn't meet all of their requirements for a certain major. So in many cases, students were transferring to UC or CSU having earned far more than 2 years worth of college credit, because they needed those extra courses to satisfy the demands of the majors they were interested in at UC and CSU. So this new associate degree for transfer, upon entry to a community college, a student will know what courses they need to take that would allow them to get out within 2 years and guarantee them admission to a major at, right now it's only California state universities that participate. UC doesn't participate except voluntarily. But many of the California state universities have established this agreement with local community colleges. So, if I'm in a community college here, I would be talking to CSU San Bernardino. I'd be talking to UC Riverside as well to try to develop more of these, what we call articulation agreements. And then the trick is to get that information in the hands of students and counselors when they can use it, which is when they first show up at the community college. If they've been there for 2 years and then they start thinking, well, I wonder where I should transfer, they've just spent 2 years, in many cases, taking courses that they probably didn't need to take.
Part of the reason that your information is so important is that, as you suggest from the beginning, this is not a static area. This is an area that's going to continue to grow. And I think the question before the inland region is really, what do we want to be when we grow up? And the other one that's often phrased, how can we be a place where our children and our grandchildren would choose to live? Any thoughts on that puzzle? And it's really the puzzle before the leaders of this region.
Well, what we looked at in our study was changes in the population, changes in the economy, and the implications for the matchup of those two in terms of educational attainment. And what we really looked at was how the economy would develop and what level of education would be required from the jobs that the economy contained, and what level of education the population profile would have, and any mismatch between those. And the more we look at it, the more it seems that the solutions to these problems just focus on increasing opportunities for education. And not to steal Hans's thunder, because this is really his bag, but everything that we looked at in the study and the numbers that we've looked at since to see how our projections turned out really focus on the educational profile of the population.
I assume you would agree with that.
I do. In fact, one of our conclusions from last night.
Why don't you go to your conclusions?
We think one of the big challenges for this region is certainly to improve the educational attainment pipeline. And there's lots of good work happening. And I said, if I was in charge of a community college, realize a lot of the community colleges are doing what we've said. And there's really good examples of cooperative work happening right now in the region. So that's to be encouraged and continued. But it's not just improving that pipeline through high school to and through college. It's also, when that student graduates from college, what's going to get them to stay here? And that's a harder question to answer. But certainly one other area where some of our colleagues have done work at PPIC shows that most job creation in California is not through recruiting firms to come here with tax incentives. I mean, I know that can make a difference in some localities, but by and large, the vast and most important source of job creation in California is new firm creation. And that's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that we love about California. Certainly, you could go to Silicon Valley and see it's alive and well there with a number of firms. And I realize most new firms don't survive. But you have very creative individuals when they've graduated from college or a vocational program who might have a lot of great ideas about how to create a new firm, what they want to do. And that's a critical time to capture them. And a lot of them are leaving the region when they finish. And so the other point of advice I would have in thinking about the future of the region would be the big challenge is to grow your own and figure out how to keep those that you've grown here locally so that the benefits of the education they've acquired, the skills that they've developed are shared locally.
Yeah, we often talk about the brain drain, but we often don't go much beyond simply acknowledging that it happens. And, well, I thank you for coming back and thinking about the Inland Empire and 2016. Your projections are really, given the Great Recession, really quite remarkable, I think, and what this calls out. And again, if you want to have your PowerPoint will be available on our website. And I really would encourage anybody interested in public policy to go online and see the kind of work that you do. There's none better in the state. And I think people who were there last night and people who are watching this understand what PPIC brings. And so thank you very much for last night. Thank you for this effort to look more closely at your work. So
thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you having us on.
The following programming is made possible through a generous donation from Randall Lewis, Executive Vice President of Upland-based Lewis Operating Companies.